You ever seen someone who seems cool, composed, emotionally unavailable, suddenly start acting strange, pulling back, getting awkward, avoiding eye contact, overthinking texts? It's like they're glitching in real time, and you start wondering, did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? But I want to shake you awake right now and tell you the truth. That strange behavior isn't detachment. It's the beginning of emotional collapse. Not in a bad way, but in a transformational one. What you're witnessing is not rejection, it's resistance. And the reason they're resisting is because love is sneaking past the defenses they've spent a lifetime constructing. Avoidants don't show fear like most people. They don't panic outwardly, they panic internally. And that internal panic starts when something real shows up, something emotionally invasive. Love is not passive to an avoidant. It's not romantic, it's a threat. Why? Because love demands vulnerability. And vulnerability, that's the one language they were never allowed to speak safely growing up. So they trained themselves to function without it. They built an identity around emotional independence. But here's what nobody talks about. Emotional independence isn't strength when it's based on fear. It's isolation dressed up as control. Now imagine what happens when that carefully curated control starts to fail. That's when they act strange. That's when they start fumbling their words, avoiding you, shutting down, or suddenly seeming robotic. But make no mistake, this isn't them being off, it's them being overwhelmed. And overwhelmed avoidants don't get louder, they get weirder. They short circuit, they regress. They analyze to the point of paralysis. What they're really experiencing is an identity crisis. Because for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time ever, they're feeling something they don't know how to file away. They can't categorize it. They can't box it up and store it in the attic of their mind. That's why they start behaving in ways that don't match who they were just a few weeks ago. Because love, real love, has no respect for the systems they've used to survive. And that's what I want you to understand. When an avoidant starts acting strange, it's not about you being too much. It's about them feeling more than they're built to handle. That's the point. The very structure of their emotional world is beginning to shift. Their system is being tested. Their old defenses are glitching under the weight of real connection. Their silence is louder. Their pauses are longer. Their eyes avoid yours, not because they don't want to look, because if they do, they might not be able to unsee what they're starting to feel. This is when their subconscious starts realizing, wait a minute, this person sees me. This person touches something real in me. This isn't just attraction, this is exposure. And for someone who's built an emotional life around avoidance, exposure is the ultimate threat. Because what if you see their flaws, their wounds, their confusion? What if you love them so they act strange, not because they don't care, but because they're finally starting to? That's the plot twist. That's what most people miss. The strange behavior is at the end. It's the beginning. It's the moment love begins to override fear, not in words, not in poetry, but in silent internal warfare. So don't confuse their shutdown for indifference. It might be the loudest love their system has ever screamed. Love doesn't always show up gracefully. Sometimes it shows up as a glitch in someone who never learned how to feel safe. And that glitch is their heart learning to reboot. When an avoidant starts pulling back, the average person makes a fatal assumption. They think it means disinterest. They believe the silence, the distance, the sudden coldness is a clear sign to walk away. But here's the truth that turns the entire narrative upside down. The pullback is not because they don't feel anything, it's because they feel too much and they don't know what to do with it. You see, avoidants have been conditioned either through upbringing, trauma, or deep internal wiring to associate intimacy with danger, not because love is bad, but because closeness historically led to pain. Maybe they had caregivers who were unpredictable or love that was inconsistent. Whatever the root, they learned early on, closeness equals risk. So they build lives around control, space, and self-reliance. It's not that they don't want love, it's that they don't trust what happens when it gets close. Now here's where it gets deep. When real love starts to take root, when someone genuinely sees them, accepts them, and stays consistent, it creates internal conflict. Their mind says, run. Their heart says, stay. And that tug of war creates friction. That's what you're witnessing when they start acting strange. It's not emotional sabotage, it's survival instinct clashing with desire. The pullback is not passive. It's a calculated defense. They retreat not because they're over it, but because they're overwhelmed by it. Love activates parts of them they've spent years trying to keep buried. Feelings they don't know how to name. Vulnerabilities they didn't give themselves permission to have, and now suddenly those vulnerabilities are being triggered by you. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your presence represents something radical to them. Emotional exposure without control. Here's something most people miss. For an avoidant, the fear of being needed is not as strong as the fear of needing someone else. That kind of dependency feels like drowning to them. So when their heart starts reaching for someone, when love begins to bypass logic, it sets off alarm bells. You're not the problem. Intimacy is. That's what their nervous system is reacting to. So what do? They withdraw. They go quiet. They overthink every message. They start looking for reasons to push you away, flaws, conflicts, anything that lets them justify the distance. Not because they want to lose you, but because losing you now would hurt too much. And if they convince themselves they don't care, maybe they can soften the blow in advance. It's backward logic, but it's deeply human. The truth is, pulling back isn't detachment, it's fear masquerading as control. Their mind is creating distance in an attempt to regulate emotional intensity. They're not backing away from you, they're backing away from the version of themselves that could actually get hurt. And if you understand that, everything changes. This is why silence is not always silence. Sometimes it's the loudest cry for emotional regulation. It's a retreat to the familiar. It's a desperate attempt to feel safe again. And ironically, the safer you make them feel, the more scared they become. Because now there's something real at stake. Now they're vulnerable. And that's the one thing they've never practiced being. So before you take their distance personally, remember this: the more they pull back, the more likely it is that something in them is being deeply touched. You're not watching love disappear, you're watching fear try to suffocate it. And if they're acting strange, it may not be the end of connection, it may be the moment love is finally waking something up. Pullback isn't rejection, it's a system reboot. And sometimes the scariest thing in the world isn't losing someone, it's finally realizing you could love them. One of the most misunderstood things about avoidance is this: when they start to feel love, they rarely express it the way you expect. You won't get sweeping declarations. You won't get midnight phone calls or handwritten letters. You'll get something far more subtle. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the entire point. Because when love begins to crack open the emotional shell of an avoidant, it doesn't come pouring out. It leaks in micro acts of connection that seem almost irrelevant on the surface, but underneath, they're everything. See, love for an avoidant isn't a fireworks show. It's a quiet rebellion against everything they've trained themselves to avoid, and because they've been conditioned to believe that emotions equal danger, they tiptoe into vulnerability like someone testing frozen ice. They don't walk, they shuffle. They don't leap, they hesitate. And every movement they make toward connection is calculated, quiet, and symbolic. So what do? You see them remember something small, like your favorite snack or a song you mentioned once. You see them send a meme late at night, delete it, and send it again. You notice them listening more than usual, asking small questions, or giving you space while still orbiting close enough to feel safe. That's not randomness. That's a love language built in self-protection. Because here's the truth. Avoidants express emotion in code. They don't show up with emotional vocabulary, they show up with behaviors, and those behaviors often look underwhelming unless you understand the depth behind them. That strange, almost robotic message they send out of nowhere, that's their version of "I miss you." That moment they show up when you didn't ask for them, that's their way of saying "you matter to me." But they won't say it. They can't say it, because saying it means facing a fear that's bigger than you. It means confronting a part of themselves they've kept buried for years. They're testing safety, testing if you'll still be there, testing if their emotions will be accepted. And most importantly, testing if they can survive being seen. That's why the gestures are small. They're not trying to impress you. They're trying to feel their way through the dark. And those micro acts, that's how they reach out without admitting how far they've already fallen. This is why your interpretation of their behavior matters more than you think. If you're looking for traditional romantic cues, you'll miss the breakthrough. You'll mislabel emotional growth as indifference. And that's the tragedy. So many people give up right when the avoidance starts reaching out in the only way they know how, not because they don't care, but because their love looks different. It has to. It was born in survival. But if you can shift your perspective, if you can recognize the intention beneath the action, you'll start seeing their small gestures for what they truly are. Massive steps of courage wrapped in silence. It's the equivalent of someone learning a new language and whispering their first words to you, hoping you won't laugh, hoping you'll stay, hoping they won't have to retreat again. And that's what makes this so powerful. Because when an avoidant starts acting strange, not cold, but awkwardly present, they're not losing interest. They're building the first fragile bridge out of their isolation. They're inching towards something they've wanted for years but never trusted enough to pursue. You're witnessing the moment the heart begins to override the mind. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it barely whispers. And it's in those whispers that the deepest truths are hidden. What most people don't realize is that emotional distance isn't always about disconnection. In fact, when it comes to avoidance, emotional distance is often a coping mechanism for emotional intensity. The very feelings they're afraid to face are the ones driving them into retreat. That strange, erratic behavior you're witnessing, that's not a lack of care. It's actually a protective strategy. Their nervous system trying to regulate what feels overwhelming. This is what makes the avoidance so complex. They crave connection just like everyone else, but the moment connection begins to feel real, their entire system goes on alert. It's like their internal alarms go off, screaming, too close, too vulnerable, too exposed. And in those moments, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to retreat. Not because they don't feel love, but because love starts to short circuit the very emotional firewall they've built to survive. Avoidants don't do conflict like others do. They don't even do connection the same way. Their first reflex when emotions start rising is to escape, not necessarily physically, but mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. They start detaching. They build walls. They go cold. But behind that detachment is a massive surge of feeling they're trying not to drown in. And the irony, the more they care, the more likely they are to shut down. That's the paradox. Love activates their fear because love brings closeness. Closeness demands authenticity. And authenticity risks rejection, abandonment, disappointment, all the things they've been trying to avoid their entire lives. So while on the outside it may look like indifference, what's actually happening is emotional overload. And the only tool they know to manage that is distance. This is why understanding emotional regulation is so crucial when dealing with an avoidant. They're not trying to punish you. They're trying to protect themselves. Their strange behavior isn't calculated manipulation, it's self-preservation. Their nervous system has been wired for solitude, not intimacy. So when connection starts to feel too big, too fast, they retreat into silence because silence feels safer than being seen and possibly misunderstood. And here's the part that often goes unseen. Their silence is filled with conflict. They're not at peace in that distance. They're thinking, obsessing, replaying, questioning. Should I reach out? Did I say too much? What if they leave me anyway? They are in a mental war zone, trying to suppress emotion on one side and trying to hold on to the connection on the other. That's the internal chaos most people misinterpret as apathy. So when you see them act strange, distant, or even cold, ask yourself this. Are they really pushing me away because they've lost interest? Or are they pulling back because they finally let themselves care and it scared the hell of them? The key is not to take the distance personally, but to understand what it's protecting. When an avoidant distances themselves, it's not about you being too much. It's about their system being underdeveloped in the realm of emotional expression. They need safety, consistency, and time to learn how to regulate without shutting down. That doesn't mean you chase. That doesn't mean you tolerate emotional unavailability forever. But it does mean that if you understand the why behind their behavior, you hold power. Power to make informed choices, not reactive ones. Because sometimes the distance isn't the absence of love, it's the overwhelmed presence of it. And when love feels too real for someone who never learned how to receive it, their system chooses survival over surrender. That doesn't make them bad, it makes them human. Emotional shutdown is often just a heart that's trying to love without the tools to express it. Don't confuse quiet struggle with absence. Sometimes it's the deepest presence fighting to surface. One of the most revealing signs that love is starting to take hold of an avoidant is when their patterns begin to betray them. I want you to really think about this. Avoidants build entire identities around control, controlling their emotions, their routines, and especially their attachment. So when they start doing things out of character, that's not accidental. That's emotional erosion. That's the wall cracking from the inside. That's what happens when love starts doing its quiet, subversive work. You'll see it in small contradictions. They'll say they're fine with distance, but suddenly they'll check in when you don't text back. They'll claim they don't like vulnerability, but out of nowhere, they'll share something oddly personal, then immediately deflect with a joke or silence. They'll say they're not looking for anything serious, but they'll get unusually irritated if they sense you pulling away. That's not confusion, that's emotional leakage. Their subconscious is revealing what their mouth won't say. I'm catching feelings and I'm terrified. And that fear, the fear of losing control, is what makes them act strangely. See, control is everything to an avoidant. It's how they've kept themselves emotionally safe their entire lives. And when love enters the picture, it threatens that safety. It pushes them out of their emotional routine. Suddenly, they're thinking about someone else more than they want to. They're waiting for a text back. They're wondering where they stand. And that lack of control, that vulnerability, it drives them mad. They don't know how to sit with that kind of emotional uncertainty because they've never practiced it. Love for them isn't ease, it's exposure. So instead of leaning in, they'll often try to regain control. They might act distant, then suddenly affectionate. They'll avoid deep conversations, then drop a bombshell of emotional truth when you least expect it. It's inconsistent because they're inconsistent internally. It's not manipulation, it's fragmentation. Their feelings and their fear are in constant combat. And here's the kicker. They don't even fully understand what's happening inside themselves. Most avoidants aren't consciously playing games. They're genuinely confused by their own behavior. Why did I miss her so much when I was the one who pulled away? Why do I feel anxious when she doesn't respond, even though I said I wanted space? They're in emotional conflict, and because they haven't learned how to regulate that conflict, they default to what they know: distancing, deflecting, overthinking. But love doesn't play by the same rules. It doesn't care about your emotional training. It sneaks past defenses. It creates desire where there used to be control. And that's where the transformation begins. When the avoidant starts acting out of character, it's not dysfunction, it's evolution. Something inside them is shifting, whether they like it or not. This is why I always say, watch the contradictions. Watch the moments that don't line up with their words. That's where the real story is. When they say they don't care, but they're suddenly paying attention to your habits. When they claim they're fine being alone, but they get weirdly reactive to your silence. Those aren't red flags. They're signs that their emotional structure is bending under the pressure of something real. The most powerful thing you can do in those moments is stay grounded in your truth. Don't overreact. Don't chase. But also don't dismiss what's happening. Because when someone's patterns start to betray them, you're witnessing the early stages of emotional awakening. You're seeing love confront fear on a battlefield that's been silent for years. When an avoidant begins breaking their own rules, it's not chaos, it's transformation. And sometimes the first sign that love is winning is when control starts slipping through their fingers. What happens when love starts taking over an avoidant isn't just a series of small behavioral shifts, it's a profound internal reckoning. It's as if their entire internal landscape is being remapped. And that process is messy, confusing, and deeply transformative. This isn't just about fear or distance or even control anymore. It's about the way love changes their very identity. When that happens, their behavior will look strange, unpredictable, even contradictory. But beneath that apparent chaos is a powerful story of growth and awakening. You have to understand that avoidants build their entire sense of self on independence and emotional self-sufficiency. It's not arrogance or selfishness, it's survival. Their identity is tied up in the belief that they must protect themselves from emotional overwhelm by keeping others at arm's length. So when love infiltrates that worldview, it feels like a threat not just to their comfort zone, but to who they believe they are. Suddenly, the very foundation they've built begins to shake. This identity crisis is where the acting strange comes from. They're caught between who they've always been, the emotionally self-contained, distant person, and who they're becoming, the vulnerable, open, connected individual. That internal conflict creates tension, and tension expresses itself outwardly in ways that seem confusing or erratic to anyone watching. They may pull away, then come back. Number two, they may seem uninterested one day, then suddenly intensely focused the next. These swings aren't a sign of fickleness or lack of love. They're the signature of transformation. Think about it like this. Imagine a castle with thick walls that have kept the inside safe for years. Love is the force slowly chipping away at those walls. The process isn't smooth or linear. There are moments when the walls seem stronger than ever because the avoidance fear is flaring up in defense. Other moments, cracks appear. And sometimes whole sections crumble. That's what you see as strange behavior. It's the aftermath of those walls starting to fall. What's crucial here is patience and understanding that love is working beneath the surface even when it's not obvious. The avoidant strange behavior is a symptom of something much bigger, the slow dismantling of emotional barriers and the emergence of genuine connection. It's their nervous system recalibrating, learning to tolerate vulnerability instead of fearing it. It's a difficult process, but it's also a hopeful one. The other side of this transformation is the risk they take. Every time an avoidant moves closer, they risk feeling exposed, hurt, or rejected. The higher the stakes, the more intense their internal fight. And because they don't always have the emotional tools to manage these feelings, their actions can look unpredictable or confusing. But what they're really doing is trying to find balance between their need for safety and their desire for love. So what can you do when you see this strange behavior? First, don't mistake it for disinterest or manipulation. Recognize it for what it is, a heart breaking open. Second, stay grounded in your own truth and boundaries. Love is powerful, but it's not an excuse to tolerate inconsistency forever. Third, encourage growth by creating a space of safety, emotional safety that says, it's okay to be vulnerable here, because that safety is the soil where love can finally grow. Remember, change is uncomfortable. Transformation shakes the ground beneath our feet. But when you witness an avoidance starting to act strange because love is taking over, know this. You're seeing the birth of something new, raw, and real. It's the moment when fear loses its grip just enough for connection to breathe. Love doesn't always come in neat packages or clear words. Sometimes it arrives disguised as confusion, contradiction, and chaos. But in those moments, love is doing its most important work, breaking down walls, healing wounds, and forging a new path toward true intimacy.